This is Full Circle, the flagship podcast from Deloitte Canada. And this season, we're doing something different. We've handed the mic to Edward Greenspan, co-chair of the Future of Canada Centre, former editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail, and president of the Public Policy Forum, for a special six-part series. At a time of rising global tensions, economic uncertainty, and political disruption, Ed is talking to a stellar cast of guests on the front lines and asking what Canada can do to leap ahead. We're calling it the Leapfrog Series. Here's Ed.
Hi everyone, I'm Ed Greenspan and I am delighted to be with you today. As you've heard, this is the Leapfrog Series of Full Circle. Why leapfrog? Well, many people have been talking about how Canada has been suffering for a long time from boiling frog syndrome. The phenomena that the economy gets worse so gradually that nobody takes much note of it. Suddenly, one day, the frog's dead, without ever having reacted to the danger around it. It so happens, though, that with the events of the past few months, the frog now is actually fully awake. And so the question becomes not what opportunities did we miss, that isn't terribly helpful anymore, but what opportunities can we act on in the current situation? In other words, what does it take to turn the boiling frog into a leapfrog? Is there a constructive and actionable agenda? And what will it take for Canada to come out of this more sovereign and more prosperous? So today we're going to welcome two guests to the program to talk about leapfrogging, and particularly to talk about it in an east-west context, an idea we're hearing more and more about as opposed to north-south. Christine Healy is a lawyer, economist, and veteran energy executive. She's pretty well done it all, seen it all. Christine is currently president and CEO of Northland Power, a global clean power producer headquartered in Toronto. Before joining Northland, she worked in Canada and Europe as an executive for Total Energies, one of the largest integrated energy companies in the world. Andrew Botterill is the energy resources and industrials leader for strategy, risk, and transactions at Deloitte Canada. So I am so delighted to have both of you here on this inaugural episode of Full Circle, the Leapfrog series.
Well, Ed, thank you so much. I am honored to be a part of this inaugural episode, and I will say it's timely and important that we talk about this. So thank you very much for the invitation.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ed, as well. I'm pretty humbled with Christine here, and I can't wait to touch on some of her background in both Canada and internationally as well, and what that means for Canada and how we look at ourselves in the global sector. So.
Well, obviously, Canada needs ideas right now. It needs to, think through how it can respond. So I'm hoping this conversation will help us on that. But let me just go backwards for a moment, Christine, with you. So on January 20th, 2025, most of us were watching Donald Trump's inauguration as president of the United States. But I think you had a particularly busy day, I suspect, on January 20th. So maybe just tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, well, it seems like Mr. Trump and I are on the same timeline, but fortunately for me, I've had a lot less press in my first 100 days. But I started at that time as CEO of Northland Power, so I was really happy to return to Canada and even happier to lead this company and move at the forefront of what's happening in energy in Canada. So I'm really excited to be back in my home country.
Okay, so you and Trump started on the same day in your respective presidencies. And tell us a little bit about Northland and how, if at all, he's affected your agenda.
So Northland Power is an independent power producer based here in Canada. We produce electricity from a variety of sources. So onshore wind, offshore wind, solar. We just had our first battery project, fourth largest in the world, first of its kind in Canada, largest in Canada. And that just came on production this week. So exciting. Now we're in batteries too. And we do gas-fired power. And so we're active in 10 countries around the world in terms of electricity generation and operation of electricity generation.
Okay, so that gives you a good window, and your previous window, as well. When you hear the idea of East-West, what comes to mind first for you, Christine?
Well, I think, Ed, The challenge we have in Canada is that we do have this very, very large economy immediately to our south, and we've created a lot of trading corridors that have been north-south with good reason, because we have a really large, very good customer, historically good customer on the southern border. So we have a lot of connections that we have made north-south. But in many ways, it means that we have neglected some of our opportunities within our own country and the set of opportunities beyond that relationship. I think certainly having worked around the world in many different countries, uh, you see internationally much more of an international perspective. And I would say that's not just in terms of business, it's also in terms of media and news and perspective on what's happening in the world. Returning to Canada, and we were abroad as a family for more than a decade, I would say returning to Canada, I'm a bit surprised at how much we talk about the United States and very little in terms of news from elsewhere in the world. And I don't remember it always being that way when I was growing up, but I do think that it's something Canada used to be much more internationally focused. And I think there is an opportunity now that we need to return to that. It's great that the United States is there as an opportunity for Canadian businesses, but there's a whole other world out there. And Canada has a lot of opportunity outside of the United States.
Andrew, how about you? Like when you think East-West, which is of course a big part of the policy discussion now, what comes to mind? What sort of things, benefits are there out there in more East-West orientation?
I love Christine's comments and the fact that we've almost over-rotated in the last little while on feeding that large customer to the south. And I know decisions and how we build our businesses are really demand-led and demand-fueled, so to speak. And we've had this large consumer to the south of us that I think took up the first and second priority in most businesses and where they were willing to invest, because we had a hungry customer, so to speak, right, south of us. And as we did that, I think we forgot to look at our own growth. We forgot to look at our own prosperity and the ability to invest in Canada, to add value-added infrastructure, not just send our unrefined products to the south. But what are the other things that we can really do to drive our own demand here in Canada? And I recognize we're not the size as a population and as a consumption that we are to the south. And I think that disproportionately attracts capital and attracts projects that kind of feed that demand beast. But I think we need to recognize that isn't going to necessarily build the feedback loops into the Canadian context, into our GDP and into our productivity that I think we really need to do. So maybe disproportionately, we need to spend more time. Yes, we're going to feed a large demand customer to the south, but we need to diversify our portfolio. We need to think about investing differently. And maybe we need to put more of a mind to appreciate our demand may not be as large, but that demand is important because it creates other productivity opportunities in Canada. And there's the multipliers on the project. It isn't about the individual barrel that goes, but it's also all the ancillary businesses that get built up in Canada, and jobs and growth and productivity, I think. So maybe we need to recognize that the business case, so to speak, of some of the stuff that we're doing is more to us if we focus on beyond that first customer and think to some of the extra growth and some of the extra opportunity for Canada.
So, Andrew, I agree with that, but I would sort of think about it, I guess I think about it in a slightly different way. If we can really use this opportunity, as Ed, you referenced the leapfrog. If we can really use this as the leapfrog moment, I think there's three tranches of opportunities. One, we've spent almost my entire adult life talking about how we want to reduce interprovincial trade barriers in Canada. I mean, I cannot count the number of times people have talked about that. There must be literally thousands of pages of white papers written about that. Can we just get on with it? Can we just do it? There are so many foolish, small things that we do, from transportation to the way that we move equipment to just even the way that we interact with one another. It just makes no sense to me. So, we've hopefully now we have a moment where we're all aligned on this, but let's get rid of the interprovincial trade barriers and actually start making it make sense in Canada that we have this east-west connection. So that's tranche one. I think tranche two is, we do have this great big potential customer to the south of us, and I think it would be foolish to ignore that. At the same time, I think any business, if you find that you have one customer for 90+% of your product, then you're probably put yourself in a bit of a risky situation. So then diversification of your customer base is important. So of course, maintain your relationship. As tranche two, we need to, you know, our relationship with the United States is extremely important in Canada. Blinding statement of the obvious. So we need to make sure that we work on that, we repair that, we make it as good as it can be. And certainly we need to take accountability for the pieces of that where we can be better. And of course, have continual dialogue because we have expectations of them as our trading partner too. So that continues. We need a good relationship with the US. But then the third tranche is international. Where are those markets that we can and should be growing? And I think that we have some good support systems in place in Canada to actually encourage that activity. So then, where are the leaders and the businesses who are going to drive that forward? It's one of the reasons I came to Northland is because Northland is active around the world. And that international aspect of the operations is really compelling for me. And I find in many of the countries that we're operating in, there are very welcoming arms for Canadian companies. They like the way that we do business. They like the way that we interact. There is, in many ways, a bit of an open field for Canadian businesses who are looking to move internationally. So I think that's kind of the third tranche of opportunities. So no shortage of things to do.
That's a very useful frame for us because, I think there's three places where we grow our economy, as you just said, at home, on the continent, and out in the world. And we probably have not, just drawn from the comments you guys have been making so far, exploited all three of those, to their fullest, right? And they don't have to be competing. You don't have to give up on one to build the other. But I wonder, Andrew, you interact with a lot of companies, and it's companies that trade. Governments set up agreements to make it easier. Governments have their role to play, but it's companies that trade. Are you hearing some kind of, the gears shifting in any way over the last several months?
I think so. And I think there is the recognition that the frustrating environment for deploying capital the last 10 to 15 years. So a lot of international companies that were here have left and struggled to get projects off the ground. And I think now is the recognition of they're hearing the words from us that they wish they'd heard, the 10 years ago when they were looking at their projects. So I think that is known. We got to get past that. We got to show Ed, like the leapfrog visual, right? Like I think we need to recognize that we need to make massive change in how we deal with our customers. And when I think to Christine's three tranches, I think what was really interesting is we talk about like at home, to the south, and abroad. And to be honest, as we look at incremental investments going forward, maybe it's the order needs to be thought about is maybe it's right now we've been doing south, then maybe abroad, then maybe at home. And maybe that needs to be flipped a little bit when we talk about the next dollar spent and the next investment spent. It maybe needs to disproportionately look like over the next decade. I think disproportionate needs to look like we need to grow and diversify that direction internationally. There are advantages we have as a company. We got to get past the damage that we've caused in the last decade. And then as well, the interprovincial trade barriers, Christine, that you talk about, it's, my father talked about it, right? Like that's embarrassing, right? That we're still talking about the same issue that we were when my father first entered the oil and gas space early in his career, right? So you're right. It is embarrassing. We need to look at how is it that we can recognize that the population of Canada and that your neighbor and that our neighbors are customers, not competitors, and that this is good for us as a whole to find ways to grow Canada and for everybody, right? Not province versus province, and that's really where most of this has come from over the last few decades. So I think to the next dollar spent, and I think we really need to think about how do we unlock those two that have been the struggle, that have been kind of the wheels spinning in the sand, so to speak.
Andrew, you raise in there a really good point about we also need international capital to invest in Canada. And that continues to be a challenge, and a challenge that I'm not sure we've fully come to grips with as a country. And the reality is, other countries around the world have tuned into this in a pretty big way. They understand that they need international capital to achieve all the things that they want to do. And given the size and scope of the challenge and opportunity in front of us in Canada, there is no question that international capital is required. So I can share with you the example of a couple of weeks ago, I attended a meeting where the governor of Louisiana gave a little talk. And I think Louisiana is an interesting case study, right? Because 10 years ago, they had 0% of US LNG exports. Then we move forward to today, and there's 61% of US LNG exports, which is spectacular growth. But alongside that growth has come other industry, other activity. The growth in Louisiana has been spectacular. But the governor stands up in this sort of, round table discussion and says, well, I think that capital goes where it's treated the best. And I'm here to tell you the place it's going to be treated the best is Louisiana. Now, by the way, I'm not here to advertise for Louisiana. That's the governor's job. But as I was sitting there, I was reflecting, I hear similar messages in different countries around the world. We want your capital. We want you to invest. Come and talk to me. We will make this happen sort of message. And I was thinking, do international investors get that same message in Canada today? And why not? Because we want the investment, we need the investment, and others are out there trying to take the space. And
Christine, what is that? Why not? Because you both, I suppose, in your life at Total, I guess you were trying to say, hey, headquarters, I'm here in Canada, come invest. And in Northland, now you also have to, make those decisions on investing in Canada, investing abroad. As you said before, the company's been very active overseas in the North Sea, other places. So why not? What's standing in the way?
Well, Ed, it's a really interesting question to me, and maybe I'm sort of counter-cyclical because I've come back to Canada because I really think that Canada has this huge sort of untapped opportunity in front of it. But there's a few things. I think there needs to be an understanding that businesses need to make good profits, and they have to invest their money where they will make good rates of return for their shareholders. A lot of Northland shareholders are Canadians, and they want returns because they're trying to save for retirement. So those shareholders, I will tell you, are a demanding bunch, and they are definitely interested in making sure that when we're deploying our capital, we're doing it in a way that is going to make money for investors. So that's, the idea that companies making money needs to happen. That seems like, again, one of these blinding statements of the obvious, but I'm not sure it's always obvious. So this rate of return consideration is important. I think the need for talent and the development of talent, we talk a lot about our neighbor to the south, but the reality is that the tax structure is very different in our neighbor to the south. And we even see, in response, I used to live for a while in Denmark. Denmark has a policy where they decided they wanted more senior executive talent to come into the country. So they actually have created this program where when companies want to bring in senior level talent, for the first 5 years they live in the country, that senior level talent pays a flat tax that's lower than what the general income tax rate would be in Denmark. It's a policy that's responsive to needing to bring in talent to make sure that you can drive your business forward. It's the kind of thing that I cannot see ever getting sort of proposed in Canada as a concept. It's fascinating to me that it was a public policy that won the day in Denmark, but it's an example of just recognizing that as a and Danes, by the way, very talented business people, tremendous country, incredible place to be. But they said, what, we want to be even more. And we want to bring in the best of international talent in order to help us get there. It was just a policy decision and then make the things happen around that. So I think that kind of vision and where are we trying to get to and be honest about our gaps, I think it's important. The reality is, how do we attract the capital? Why is capital going elsewhere? And I'm not sure that we have really wrapped our arms around that. We did, Andrew, you said we had a lot of international investment in Canada, I would say 2 decades ago. A lot of that is not there anymore. And many of those companies will likely be difficult to convince to return.
Well, a lot of it was going to the oil sands. from tax changes that were made, which helped open up the oil sands in the early 2000s, and huge building boom that I think petered out with the collapse of oil prices in 2014. So is it a global environment in which we can't control, or is it, Andrew, things that we're doing or not doing at home?
I want to point out that the asset that you laid out there still continues to be one of the largest growth engines in all of the Canadian economy, and we've scared capital away from that, which is just it's unbelievable. And we've seen it consolidated into a few players, and we struggled to approve projects to move things forward. So, Christine, when I was thinking about what you were saying and Ed's question right now, as I look at really the bigger issue and why the feelings are over us in the last decade is that the time it took for projects to get approved, right? We have made things exceptionally difficult to advance projects. And it's because the only advocates for these projects were private enterprise trying to push forward against layers of regulatory involvement and many stakeholders to try to bring to the equation. And private industry wants to invest the capital in that project. And I think this is where governments, whether they be provincial, federally, need to step in and say, these are the ones that we want to see move forward for Canada. And we're going to not create more barriers and create more approvals on top of it, but we think for a measure of what we're trying to achieve in not just the project, but our GDP and our project productivity. And Christine, your idea of executive, like if we're talent short on trades to develop these projects, right? Again, programs can be made to bring in these and unlock productivity and get these projects built faster. So, Christine, you've deployed some capital here in Canada recently, right? What was it that was special that made those projects happen sooner and quicker? Those are the things we got to mimic, and we got to mimic on the bigger stuff, right? And to the areas that Canada is exceptionally advantaged, which is large resources. We're sitting on some of the world's largest resources, and the world wants them. Yet we're making it very difficult to attract the capital to go and develop them and share them and create benefit for Canada.
Andrew, we do have these phenomenal resources under the ground, but you're exactly right that the permitting time for moving projects forward is not competitive for Canada. That years ago, I saw a study that sort of takes a simple warehouse and moves it around the world to see which places in the world do that more quickly or less quickly. And Canada did very poorly just on that. And I can tell you that pretty well everything we need to do from an infrastructure perspective is a lot more complicated than a warehouse. So, and then I had an interesting conversation actually with a government official who explained to me, oh, well, in Canada, we need to make sure, it takes the time that it takes in order to get it right. To which my response was, as politely as I could manage, part of getting it right is how long it takes. This is important. These things can't be separated like they exist in two totally separate universes. We have, recent meeting, I talked to some executives who did this phenomenal project in California, transformational sort of energy project, really a beacon. And they said, the permitting process was really tough on that, not sure we would go down that road again. And I said, oh, well, what do you mean? How long did it take? Get ready. 3 years. 3 years was the permitting process that they thought was unacceptably long. Compare and contrast Canada LNG, our LNG export facility for Canada that we're trying to, is going into operation very soon. I think 13 years to get approval on that guy. Like these 3 and 13 are not the same. This is not a tiny tweak. This is a fundamental change in how we do things.
Okay, so let's take this around. If I may, I think I'm sounding like the prime minister there. I'm sorry.
Yeah, absolutely.
Speaking of the prime minister, in his acceptance speech on election night, he said, "Build, baby, build." Now, that's not something that we've heard a lot of prime ministers of Canada say recently. But in order to deliver on that, the points saying, and he's sort of trying to create, I think, a standard of 2 years for regulatory approvals. So is that good enough? And how can you help him with some advice you might give here to realize that, here's what your government needs to do to hit the standard that you want to hit? Christine.
Well, Ed, I think a focus on getting it done is important. We've done a lot of talking for a long time in the country, so actually getting things done is important. And I would offer maybe a little hopeful example to say that it is possible. So Northland Power this week, we announced with our partners the Oneida Energy Storage Project here in Ontario. It's in operation on the electricity grid as of right now. It's Canada's largest battery energy storage project. It's first of its kind in the country. 250 megawatt, 4-hour duration. It's about an hour and a half outside of Toronto. And phenomenal experience.
With Indigenous ownership, I believe, as well, right?
With Indigenous partners. And Enerstore, they came up with the idea at the beginning, and Aecon as well came in as a partner, supported by the Infrastructure Bank. The project is an enormous success, and it has come in ahead of schedule and under budget. And in terms of large CapEx projects in the world, in all industries that come in ahead of schedule, under budget, for projects over $100 million, it's less than 10%. So it's a huge achievement. And from the time that we became involved as Northland Power through the construction phase into operation was 2 years. So we're really very pleased with the outturn on that and the way that that could be done. But that meant that we had Indigenous communities, our partners, the local community in Haldimand County, the Ontario government, the regulator, the developers, our banks, all pushing together in order to make that happen. So the good news is that it can happen. So we can do this in Canada. We can build big, complicated things, and we can do it quickly and effectively. So it's possible. So I would say that that's my first message to the Prime Minister, is that it is possible, but we need to make it easier, because that happened with a huge amount of, perseverance and close relationships with the partners, but it should be able to happen easier. So the idea that we're going to have timelines, but at the end of those timelines, there has to be certainty as to what's happening. Because that's the problem we have now too, is that in our regulatory process, you can do everything right, but at the end, it's an unfettered determination of whether your project gets the green light or not. That's too much uncertainty for business. So for large scale, this project, we were well aligned. We could understand where it fits and why it fits, and we were able to make it all work together, which is great. I'm happy for that. But not every project is as clearly aligned as that. And so it's helpful as an investor to know early, is this going to make it through the process or not? Because the process in Canada is time consuming and expensive. So then we make decisions about where we are going to deploy capital. So I would say to the Prime Minister that there needs to be certainty in terms of the outcome. Having it fully discretionary at the end of the outcome, as it is under the current process, makes it very difficult from an investment perspective. And by the way, I testified about that in front of the Senate when Bill C-69 was being proposed. I flew back home in order to testify in front of the Senate to say, from an international perspective, this decreases Canada's investability. The fact that there's this amount of uncertainty at the end of the process, and really, we have to compete for capital. So I brought that forward then. I would make the same comment now. So the timeline is important, yes. But at the end of the process, you need to understand that, if you meet the barrier, if you meet the requirements, then you're going to be able to move forward with your project. That certainty is important.
Andrew, I know you want to come in, and I want you to come in, and I want you to maybe put this in the context of the many clients you talk to in industries who are going to have to invest if we're going to build, them. What you're hearing from them about what they need.
Well, so I love Christine's story about that it's possible, that 2 years is possible, and that's a timeline. She called it a great experience of the fact that everyone was aligned on the project, right? And this checked a lot of boxes for Canada, for continued greening of our grid, advancing the new technology that we want to understand and incorporate as part of our Canadian grid and all that. It did not have cross-border complexity. It did not have all of that, which is the big projects that we also need to advance in the country around bigger infrastructure. Christine, you talked about LNG. You talked more LNG off the coast. whether it be cross energy corridors, grids across provinces. These are all going to be even more complicated, and the 2 years needs to be true in that case as well. So it means that the alignment needs to come. It needs to be crystal clear at the start that we recognize that this may not check off all 10 of the boxes that we were hoping that we would like to do on all of our projects, but we recognize that the 6 or 7 boxes that it does check are really important for Canada, and we're going to help others with energy poverty or others with greening their energy mix around the globe. So the recognition that we can't be perfect and do only the perfect projects, that needs to be understood early, and that needs to be fed into day one on the project to recognize that if we go through 2 years of getting capital aligned and banks and debt and regulatory approvals and all of this kind of stuff, that to Christine's point, at the 2 years at the end, is that the answer is like, if you met all of these hurdles, the answer is yes, versus, well, then we'll decide if we like this for the purpose of Canada or with politics involved.
Yeah, both of you have kind of moved into electricity, discussion as well, one way or another. And I actually want to go a little deeper on that again. The Prime Minister in that acceptance speech spoke about clean energy and conventional energy. So, definitely people are talking about pipelines and oil and gas projects and the export of gas off, I'm going to say the West Coast for now, Christine, but if you want to correct me on Newfoundland, go ahead. But electricity is something that we need much, much more supply of. People say 2 times the supply, 2.5 times the supply in order to hit the kinds of goals that we would like to hit as a country. And we have, of course, some natural advantages because our grid is, relatively clean to start with. But a lot of the discussion is also around interties. And I've been down the interties road. You've been down the interties road. It makes perfect sense. And unless maybe sometimes you're a province and you're a little bit worried about being beholden to the province next door. Do you think we have a new attitude going on in the country around interties?
I hope so, Ed. And I will say I'm going to try to keep a positive perspective on that conversation because there's a long history between Newfoundland and a neighboring project about interties and electricity. So try not to bring that into the piece. But, I want to back up to what you said, that when you say we have a relatively green grid, I got to pause there and say, in fact, this is where Canada does not give itself enough credit. We have the 4th greenest grid in the world. So when you look at Canada's electricity grid, 4th greenest grid in the world, it means 98% of the world's countries are much further behind than us. And it means that our set of challenges is exciting and interesting, but it's important for Canada. The rest of the world is in a really different place in terms of what they're trying to do with their grids, what they're trying to do with their electricity infrastructure. So our last mile of the greening effort is very different than many other countries who are on their first mile or who are still trying to deal with energy poverty. We have more than 1 billion people on the planet who are still in energy poverty. So we have, electricity markets globally are in full growth mode, which is really exciting for those of us who work in electricity. It's great news all around. But I think Canada needs to understand that the challenges in Canada and the opportunities in Canada are different than the opportunities elsewhere around the world. Now, for a company like Northland, we love the fact that Canada has had this experience because we can take it into other countries and it becomes a very helpful way of generating new business and developing new opportunities for us as a company. But for us as a country, we need to understand that our set of solutions are different and our needs are different than in almost everywhere else around the world. So I think it's just important that we keep that in mind because we do have a lot of conversation in Canada about how we're going to lead the world the reality is that almost nobody in the world has what Canada has, this very green grid, which we should be really proud of, huge amount of resources under the ground, which also we should be very proud of, and a skilled, dynamic workforce who know how to get stuff done. We just need to unleash that. That's the opportunity.
Christine, why are we being so hard on our own grid, right? Why do we treat it so difficult when we are as green as we are, right? So you talk about the challenges are different here in Canada. It's like, yeah, we are. We've been on a greener journey for a long time, and we've been blessed with a lot of natural benefits that turned our grid green early, right? But we don't need to be that difficult on our grid and recognize that the incremental investments that we need to do, we don't need to grow and be green like a lot of other countries need to do, right? So like we have the opportunity to grow green and capture some of these edges pieces. We're not actually trying to tackle two massive issues at the same time. We've kind of only got one and a bit, right? Like, so the opportunity I think is really real for us to continue to invest and do the projects like you've talked about, but recognize that we are advantaged already and we don't need to measure ourselves to the toughest of standards.
To what extent is the greenness of the grid an advantage in terms of competitiveness?
I think that's an important question. I think the real strategic advantage for Canada is that we have a robust grid and affordable electricity. So then you have to wonder, with that advantage, why are we not seeing more investment from various industrial players? And that's the question that I think we need to be really honest about giving ourselves answers on. I think the answer is that we're insufficiently competitive on other things, like the permitting, like the business environment and the way that it's complicated. You know, I've had my own boards of directors say to me, Canada's complicated. It's not one set of rules, it's 13 sets of rules. They're right. 13 sets of rules. That is absolutely true. So it's not a straightforward investment decision as it would be in some other countries.
I think we need more organizations that are working to yeses in the country, and yes, for not just the return on capital, but for Canada and growth and GDP.
Return on capital is king. If I go talk to my shareholders and say, oh, well, you know, you're going to get a lower return, but you're going to feel good about it because we're investing in this particular geography versus another, I can tell you that what the reaction is going to be, and it'll be clear.
You're not going to be CEO for too long without on.
No.
Yeah, it might be a bit of a, what do they call it, a career limiting move. So, I mean, you have to, you know, we have to deliver returns for shareholders. And so that's where Canada's competitiveness is critically important, and its competitiveness on permitting, on taxation, on, you know, this sort of, you know, the overall ability to do business in the country. I think that's important. We have to realize that the competitive landscape has gotten even tougher than it was 10 years ago. Other countries are looking for those dollars, and we need to compete.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap up this part of the discussion. I want to ask you one final question, which is just on a scale of 1 to 10. And given that the situation that the country is in that really is rethinking things, you know, and new, how optimistic or pessimistic, let's say pessimistic is 0, optimistic is 10. How are you feeling about pulling off a leapfrog?
I'm an inherently optimistic person, so I'm going to give that an 8 and say, for right now, I'm going to stay very optimistic, but the next 6 months are going to be very important to see, do we see the changes in the posture of all of our governments, many governments in Canada? Do we see a change in posture that's really oriented towards this leapfrog opportunity? So this is the moment, this is the time. Will we see that happen? Then we'll see if my optimism is well placed.
Andrew, your number?
I'm going to take Christine's lead, and I'm going to try and hold on to that. I'm going to say 6 or 7 because I believe we are going to do the right things to unleash some projects in the next months directly, because we're going to want to show some quick wins. I think we're going to see that. Where I really want to see is I want to see that sustaining. I want to see that as this isn't just about picking a project or two to do a ribbon cutting and advance it, but I want to see a foundational change in how we do the regulatory environment for all projects, not just 2 winners that we pick or something like that. So my optimism is I think we will see some big moves here in the coming months. What I want to see is change in actually the entire environment and the regulatory, not just us picking a couple projects for the headlines.
Okay. Andrew Botterill, Christine Healy, thank you so much for helping enlighten us. And I'm sure that this conversation will be listened to in places that you're trying to influence what they're thinking. So thank you for being with us, Christine. Congratulations on the new position and the project that you have coming on batteries.
I'm going to do a 2-second moment on Oneida to say that I do want to say huge thanks to NRStore, the Six Nations of the Grand River, ACON, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, because that partnership was a phenomenal example of what we can get done.
Great project. Duplicate it. Let's go, Christine. I love it.
All right. Thank you both. Look forward to talking again soon. Okay, Andrew, we're back for a couple of minutes just to, do a little bit of a recap of what we've heard. And I'm just wondering, what would your main takeaways be from the conversation we had today?
I love Christine's optimism. I challenged myself as I was thinking through that, because what I will admit is, as I've been spending time with clients, what I have in my ear, so to speak, is that we want to invest. We're struggling to attract capital from headquarters, maybe outside of Canada. How do we make ourselves competitive? We need to get our project built, but we need to work in a global portfolio. So, with those, I guess, complaints, of the last decade, it's tough to be optimistic. But I try to remind myself, like, the environment that we're hearing right now from both parties across the country, coast to coast, is a message that we haven't heard really in my entire professional lifetime, of this reinvest in Canada, drive our productivity, and how can we, get past interprovincial trade barriers. The optimism, what, I should take more of Christine's optimism and get out there, and because I do believe that there is an opportunity, and maybe it is upon us and others to bring that optimism to the forefront, so that it makes our government officials and our regulatory environment work towards a yes, and for the benefit of the country.
So if you put onto the clients who you're talking to the 1 to 10 question I asked on pessimism, optimism, where do you think, on average, they would be at?
2, 3, 4, and
oh, really?
and it's on the backs of a slate of projects they've been unable to advance, right? So, I think all of them, if you listen to what we're hearing from the CEOs and leaderships and executives of the companies that we deal with in the country, I think what you'll hear now is prove it, right? So at least now that they feel like the message that they're hearing from our government is the message that they need to hear to try to convince their investors to allow them to spend the capital in the places and get the return. So the prove it is real. And to my comment on a couple of key projects, yes, I think we need to get some out of the gate, and I think we need to show a case, but we have to show the ability we want to continue to advance, and we want to disproportionately invest in projects in Canada and get out of the way of opportunities.
And how big is the Canada-US factor that, what's been going on around tariffs, around the idea of we're talking about in the conversation, building at home, building east-west, exporting to other countries, does that give them some renewed hope?
I think so. And I am optimistic on this. I think we're going to get through this noise of Canada, US. Say what you will about the administrations, that there's a recognition that Canadian businesses do a lot of business in the United States. There's a lot of revenue. There's a lot of dollars that cross the border. And that's going to continue to be the case for a long time, right? So I actually say we got to mind that relationship. We got to keep it strong. We got to maybe get past some of the bumps that we're dealing with right now. And I don't doubt that we can do that. And then, do you know what's interesting is that's what's going to pay for the new investments, right? Us being able to continue to sell our products into the United States, be the profitable companies that we are and have been for this entire period. That is the cash that can be reinvested. Right. So that relationship needs to be strong. We need to continue to harness that. But that's the cash that's going to pay for the next investment. And that's, important that we recognize that base is here. We need to mine the sore, so to speak, right? And then find the ways, how do we take that cash and deploy it for Canada and not just take cash out of the country?
Well, if there's one number that's made an impression upon me this year, and it's not a very, well-known number, I think it should be better known. It's that the Bank of Canada said that the TMX pipeline is by itself contributing 0.4% to the GDP of Canada by itself. And so that's what you get for the first time, perhaps, for exporting oil and raising the price of the oil that we sell to the United States at the same time. And now we're going to hopefully do a similar thing in gas. So I guess that shows the importance of some of these projects, right?
It does, right? And it's a great example. Do you remember how hard that project was? And is still?
Yeah.
Right? So that was a very difficult project to get over the line. Say what you will about how expensive it was to build versus first expectations and all of that kind of stuff, right? But I think the business case, that project shows to us, this isn't just about the customers that have pipeline capacity there and are moving their barrel off the West Coast into Asia at a different price than they were before. So what it has also done is it has narrowed the differential for every barrel of oil sold in Canada since that pipeline turned on, right? But I'll tell you, Ed, like the investment that happened in that pipeline was based on the companies and the tolls and them looking at their rate of return and saying, can I get an extra $1 or $2 or $3 if I'm selling that barrel elsewhere and diversifying? Canada is getting the benefit of elevated prices across many other players. So the economic case and the rate of return that Christine was talking about, that can happen in companies. We got to unleash that, right? Canada needs to step in and say, hey, we also recognize that you need to get a rate of return, but it's going to be worth something to us as a country because it's going to do other things for us in our GDP and how we develop. So what's nice is that you and I have that project to look at right now and say, hey, look what it did. Like high water floated all boats, and it's created more economics into the country than that first business case, so to speak, would have drawn, right? So that makes the investment for maybe the next project. We get the ability to look over the fence to that and say, hey, maybe we need to do another one of these and recognize that sometimes these infrastructure builds are more than the cash flow of the individual product and the project. It's like,
I don't know about the optimism, but I hear the hopefulness starting to build in you. So
I'm trying. Maybe Christine was contagious. So
thanks so much for your insight today.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to Full Circle, the Leapfrog series. If you enjoyed the conversation, please subscribe and share it with other people you know who might also enjoy it. Next time, we're going to tackle one of the most discussed topics in the country, trade, and how to diversify Canada's markets. Now, that's a strategy that's been tried before, and it has never succeeded yet in reducing dependence on the single market of the United States, but now we have a chance again. Stay tuned. I'm Edward Greenspan. Thanks for listening.